Hello, everyone, and welcome to Right Here, Right Queer. I am one of your hosts today. I'll be moderating this episode. My name is Nina, and here with me I have a few other people. Who are we?
Hi, I'm Luna Day.
This is Noah Hawthorne.
And I'm Sebastian Nothwell.
All right, today we have met to discuss one of my favorite topics, which may shock people who have read my books. We're talking about fantasy religions and religion in world building, which is super exciting. Before we get too deep into things, do we want to talk about our background with religion just in general?
So, in primary school, I went to a Church of England school, and so it was very Christian focused. You know, we sang hymns, we only learnt the one religion, I did Sunday school, things like that. And then when I went into secondary school, it wasn't a Church of England based school, so it was quite open, and we had religious studies as a class, and I learnt about all these new shiny religions, and it was quite mind-boggling for me because I hadn't really learnt about any of the others before, and so that really opened my eyes up a bit. And then, into sort of adulthood, explored it further.
Fantastic.
And you're kind of witchy now, aren't you, Luna?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if pushed, I would say pagan, but I don't really believe in any specific gods or goddesses. I mean, I always really liked the older religions. I always really liked sort of mythology and those sort of things, you know, reading books when I was growing up. But now I'm just just nature and the universe kind of thing. But yeah, definitely along the sort of pagan witchy lines.
Bring this up because I am also down the pipeline of started off here and ended up witchy vibes. But anyway, I'm Jew-ish, you know, very heavy on the ish. I went to Sunday school here and there when my parents thought to bring me. My extended family, I feel was more religious than I was growing up. It was more of a cultural thing for me. And over the years, I've gone more to, as Luna said, the universe, nature. I don't have a specific god or goddess, but I definitely lean to more nature, natural things like crystals, plants, the different things they can signify. And I got a bunch of tarot cards, so that definitely counts.
Definitely.
So I was raised Unitarian Universalist, which, raise your hand if you've heard of it before.
Not I, said the cat.
I have.
I actually have.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there you go.
It's kind of like a Build-A-Bear for faith.
Build-A-Bear for faith.
The official logline is to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. So from childhood, we were taught to study a variety of belief systems to find what worked for us as individuals.
Oh,
okay.
That sounds nice.
Yeah, one of our Sunday school lessons was taking broken crayons and melting them together into rainbow crayons to show that a variety of disparate faiths could come together to build something beautiful. And
Wow.
Wow.
so, that's where I'm coming from.
That's so different from what I'm used to.
That's what I have learned in adulthood, is that almost no one else got that experience.
I'm jealous.
Yeah, there's a church nearby me that's Unitarian Universalist, and they have a huge pride flag and Black Lives Matter flag, and they had people in Minnesota not long ago. They're very anti other churches around here that are more the rural conservative vibe, and I love them just for that.
That's really nice. So mine's pretty complicated, but I'll try and keep it short. My mother was a Bible teacher, and my dad grew up Catholic because he's Puerto Rican. But then when he moved to the States, he converted to Baptist, and that's how my parents met, was through their Baptist church. So I was raised very religious. I went to several different denominations of churches growing up because I grew up in Seattle, Washington, which is a little more liberal. And my parents, it took them some time to find a church that had the views and values that they liked. And then they had a bunch of friends who also had churches that they went to that my parents wanted me to be involved with. So basically, I was at church almost every day of the week. My summers were spent working at VBS, Vacation Bible School for those who aren't aware, or at different summer camps. I was really, really dedicated to faith. It was my whole life. And then I went to a Baptist university, Sikkim Bears, and while there, started to deconstruct, which was quite the experience. And if you've read my first book, The Unwanted Prophet, I think you can kind of see where that put me. And that's the short version of that.
Deconstructing at a religious college sounds like quite the experience.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I would say that it was their fault, positive, because we were required to take 2 religious classes just along with our regular curriculum. And those classes were biblical, like, analysis of the actual text and then also church history. And both of those classes were very analytical and very factual and basically challenged a lot of the dogma that I had grown up with by being very, like, actually founded in facts. And that's really what started the ball rolling. So I owe you one to those classes for snapping me out of it, I guess. Now, currently, I guess that's a good place to say, currently I have deconstructed. I would call myself agnostic. I don't think I'll ever believe in anything as seriously as I believed in Christianity growing up and evangelicalism growing up, but I still find myself looking at the world in a lot of ways that I think were informed by growing up Christian, and I'm aware of that, and I don't know that I necessarily hate that about myself. Speaking of, our next question here is, what about religion makes us want to write it?
So, for me, without getting too heavily into it in a real life context, religion and faith are very strong motivators for people. I think whatever somebody believes in, they can be very passionate and it can be very instructive in the decisions that they make, whether those decisions are perceived as good or bad. And I think it's really interesting to write characters who make their decisions based on faith or act in a certain way based on sort of cultural faith. You know, they're sort of raised in a certain way and are perhaps deconstructing it, and the conflict that then creates either within themselves or in the outside world.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. It is a very human looking at the real world. It is a facet of a lot of the ways that people approach issues, so it makes sense to kind of want to mirror that.
You guys are so, like, fancy and well thought out, and I'm just like, a lot of people have trauma. They need to work through it, is my general answer. But no, I think for me, it's kind of a way to combine different things I've picked up, like from my Jewish culture and certain things I view now that are more like pagan. And you can kind of mash them up and put them in something that you kind of wish the world would be. But that's kind of more personal than anything like a wider reason.
I like that, though. That's a good reason.
It is a good reason. Just wait till we get to my answer, and I think you'll maybe feel a little better about yourself.
And I can see that in your writing, actually, Noah.
No, yeah, absolutely. Sebastian.
Yeah, kind of pursuant to what Luna said, it's difficult to imagine a society without some sort of religious framework, even if that framework is rejected by the protagonists. And what a society believes or doesn't believe, what faiths come together or clash, and how a character fits themselves into that framework can say a lot about a story and help the world feel more believable.
Yeah, it's almost, to a point, it becomes almost weirder if some fantasy worlds, like, don't have a religion sometimes, because it'll feel like there is a hole in the culture where one should be, because it's a question humans have had for, like, as long as we've been around, is, like, where do things come from? And while science is definitely an answer, I think that a lot of the time the instinct is to pull towards spirituality. And so if you don't have that in your world, it can feel like you're missing a part of the human experience. For me personally, to kind of go back to what Noah said about people have trauma, when I first started writing, especially Unwanted Prophet, I was still, again, deep in it, and Prophet was me working through a lot of things. And at the time, my motivation for including a big fantasy religion was partially, I'm sure, trauma and trying to work through trauma subconsciously. But also, I was under the impression that if you were spending time on anything frivolous, you were dishonoring God. That's how deep in it I was. So I was convinced that if I dedicated this insane hyperfixation I had towards this story to make this story about, how God is good and organized religion is the bad thing, then that would make my writing worthwhile and godly. And that was something that I really cared about at the time. And since then, I think my view has gotten a lot more analytical, because a lot of the things that I read and watch also focus a lot on religion a lot of the time. And I think I've been able to get a little more distant from that, but I think my initial motivation for wanting to write fantasy religion was working through trauma in a very personal way.
You can take this out if you want to, but I wonder if that's why the third book is just hitting differently for you, because, like, you've worked through that.
Yes.
And it's just, like, not the same you're not tackling the same thing anymore, so that whole story feels different to you because you have a new mindset.
You're absolutely right, because like it's hard, especially because of where Prophet ends and who Quincy is as a person and who I am as a person by the time our stories respectively have ended. We've ended at very different kind of conclusions about religion, because Quincy is still very enthusiastic about her God and her relationship with her religion, and I am just not. So as much as I really adore her, and I think that in her world that is the correct conclusion to come to, it's really hard to put myself in her mindset to try and write her as a character again, because we are very different people now. But that's a really good observation. Thank you. What are some of our favorite examples of fantasy religions in like TV shows, movies, video games, whatever we like to watch, read, and do?
So, one of mine that I quite like, and it's not a particularly queer-friendly show, is Game of Thrones. So they have the Seven, which are the sort of facets of people's personalities that are represented by deities. And the faith in the show and in the books is quite a prevalent part of the story. And I find that concept quite fascinating, because I do think it harkens back to the other sort of mythologies and religions that I like ancient Greek and ancient Roman and Norse and things like that. So I find that one particularly interesting.
Yeah, I'm not really familiar with, apart from, because I watched Night of the Seven Kingdoms, but I haven't seen Game of Thrones. And even in Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the way that the Seven are spoken about and how they affect the culture and how people invoke them in the culture is so interesting. And I definitely, if that's the one thing about Game of Thrones that I'm like really interested in, it would definitely be that. So I can see why, especially with talking about your particular interests, that makes a lot of sense.
So I have game and book examples. For games, for me, is Baldur's Gate 3. And just in general, that universe, D&D. I like the idea of gods being like not so infallible and not really defeatable, but they're just a little guy, you know? And they're just here to cause some mischief, or they're just here to put their hands in things. I like the idea of there being more than one god and them kind of interfering with each other. One's plans might not fit another's plans, and causes a lot of rifts and opportunities for heroes to step in. The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons is kind of similar. The gods are more tangible. I don't really want to give away anything or spoil anything because it's like so deeply tied to the characters, but like reincarnation of people or heroes or legends, like not really anybody can become a god, but it's easier to become a god than you would think. So that's kind of a trend that I really like with books and games. And also The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman is like Arthurian, and it's kind of at the time period where the old ways and pagan mythology and all of that is giving way to Christianity. And that's kind of represented in the characters and the few like legends and stories that they go through. It's like they're still battling these old things and monsters, but with a different mindset. And I like that as well.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how where the world is in relationship to like how religion has evolved over the course of or like how technology and culture has evolved over the course of the world can then influence what regard religion is held in throughout the fantasy world. And I like the kind of diversity across the examples you brought up. It's very interesting. Sebastian.
I don't have any.
Fantastic. Oh, you're so real for that.
Don't they cry out to God in the terror one or two times as they're, being pulled?
Literally was just about to say that shit. I was just about to bring up the terror as well.
Well, spirituality in the terror is a little like, because it's like several different white people's perspective on creating a monster that doesn't necessarily exist out of religions that do exist. And it's like, I don't know that we should be playing hacky sack with Inuit culture right now, but sure.
I understand that, but I also think that is I think that's a very, like in this specific conversation, I think that's another valid thing to, if it's not one of our favorite examples, it is at least an example worth bringing up because it is a unique one. My favorites are, I have an example, I have a video game and a book as well. My video game is the Dragon Age series. I am obsessed with the way that Dragon Age does religion. It's my favorite part of that world, and I wish it had a little more solid of a delivery, but where it starts is so interesting because each culture has its own major world religion, and aspects of each one are true. But others are misinterpreted by the mortal cultures who are engaging with the real thing. And I love watching how those different misinterpretations affect what people will do in the name of those religions. And each culture has their own version of religious extremism, whether it's the Chantry and their anti-magic bent, where they are keeping mages in towers under, like, armed guard. Or you have the elves who have their religion wiped out through slavery, and certain characters are bent on bringing the old gods back for different reasons. Or you have the Kunari who follow a strict religious code that informs a lot of their ability to engage with other cultures. And I think that it's one of the more realistic versions of how religion would exist in a world that has magic and spirits and an afterlife and stuff. It can be very painful to deal with when you're trying to play the games and you maybe have a background in religion, but it also has made it very near and dear to my heart. The book example, I would be remiss if we didn't bring it up because we're talking about religion. Church of the Mountain of Flesh by Kyle Wakefield, obviously.
Obviously.
Have to bring it up, gotta bring it up, shout out to Kyle. Basically, my two favorite versions of a religion in fantasy are this very highly structured one like Dragon Age, or this kind of eldritch, beyond human comprehension version, like in Church of the Mountain of Flesh, where ostensibly Church of the Mountain of Flesh is based in a kind of nebulous version of our world. The god that they are worshipping is fundamentally like analogous to the Christian god. But when our main character's soul starts to interact with that god and pray to that god and have that god answer, there's something more sinister to it that's very hard to put your finger on. And the desires and the wants of this god and this hunger from this god are very different, but still so close to the Christian god I grew up with that it's really like tangible and upsetting. And I love that very much. I love how you can take the established tenets of a real world religion and then twist them to fit the themes of a story. And I think Kyle did that really, really well in Church of the Mountain of Flesh.
I feel like this is like that Tumblr post I just saw yesterday where it's talking about Jesus being retold through someone else's religion, and it's just like this horror story.
Yeah.
He crawled back from the dead and, all of that.
Exactly. And it's like, similarly, it's like if you take something that is horrible and horrifying and then you retell it through the language of someone who has benefited from it and who wants to think of it as a good thing. Midnight Mass is a great example of that. I think Midnight Mass is the perfect example of that, of someone who meets a literal like monster, but because it saves him, he rewrites his perception of that monster to be an angel. Like, sorry. I that's a really good point. When building a fantasy religion, what do you start with? There are a lot of ways to approach religion. So do you start with maybe the practices of the culture who are worshiping a god? Do you start with the god themselves, or the like ultimate question of like the creation of the world? What is your like touch point when you start building a religion?
Mine varies depending on, or has varied depending on which series I'm writing. So the Fae books, I'll just get those out of the way. There's very little in terms of religion. They believe in fate, that's it, end of, and there's not a huge amount of plot in that series anyway. The Threya saga, I was actually really heavily inspired by a period of British history prior to when England was formed, when we had people coming over from Scandinavia. I know it's not historically accurate, but for ease, I'll say Vikings. So it was when the Vikings came over and they met with the Saxons, and there was this conflict between Christians and people that had polytheistic beliefs. And I was really heavily inspired by that. So that kind of came first. I really wanted the conflict to be between a people that had a single deity faith and people that had a multi-deity faith. And so it's very similar in terms of, the structure of each religion. And you can see that in the stories. And I came up with a creation story because I needed one, because it's kind of part of the plot. Minor spoilers there. And I sort of came up with the sort of main deities, so the brothers, their wives, and their children, and what each of those stood for, and had sort of like a little story around each one because I needed that for the plot. But then when I needed just like a filler, I would just kind of do it on the spot. So like, oh, and then there was this god who's, you know, the god of such and such, and, you know, I would come up with it on the spot. And then the sort of societal beliefs around those religions just kind of happened naturally because they were heavily inspired by real religions. With my third series, which you all know about but nobody else knows about because that's when I fell down a really, really big side quest, was a lot more fantasy based, and I really wanted to create something that it came from like society first. So what would different cultures believe in? How did it affect how they interacted with each other? I didn't want religion to be the source of conflict in that world, and so I had to come up with something different for how everyone interacts with each other based on their faith system. And so I can't tell you anything else about that, but that was a really interesting one. So that was like, yeah, society and culture first, and then the gods and goddesses came afterwards.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
See, I'm backwards.
Oh.
I got to start with the creation story and the gods. The way I've done it in my first series, the Iverborn series, and the Adventures in Levena series is very similar, but kind of different. So I'm going to go with talking about the Levena series because it's the most in-depth one that I have. And I feel like after I wrote the first book, not really general, but I had them down and what they stood for and how they came to be. But then after the second one, when the world kind of expands and there's more of like an academic perspective or character, you know, different gods, it's polytheistic religion for most of the world, but some people are atheists, which is like when gods are such a fact of people's life is really interesting, and those characters are really interesting to write. That's book 3. I like the idea of worlds starting with like a family of gods or like brothers and sisters, and then from them they create these beings that aren't really gods or like baby gods, but the mortals view them as that. And then from then they just keep creating until you have mortal races. So for Levena, like certain ones live in certain areas of the world and make certain races, and they're more worshipped than others, depending on how those races turned out. Again, I feel like they can cause a lot of rifts and conflict between the mortal peoples, even if the gods aren't around anymore. And again, like I like the idea of meddling gods. So they are, and they definitely have a plan that they want to enact and want their mortals to be part of. So I guess to me, that's why they're always first, because I like the idea of them being involved, and I got to know what their plan is before I can make anyone else's.
That's super interesting to me. I have this urge now, and it will take time because I'm a very slow mood reader, but one day I'm going to have read both in yours and Luna's series with religions, and I'm going to be thinking about this conversation the whole time and kind of seeing how that influences how religion comes up in the books.
Noah's are great. You will not regret it. I absolutely love the way Noah handles religion in their books.
I'm pumped. I'm pumped as hell.
I just think it's fun.
It is.
I like the idea of gods being imperfect and therefore making it everybody else's problem.
Same.
Everybody else's problem.
Sebastian.
I begin with religious practices because I prefer to leave the actual existence of any deity ambiguous, and I'm less concerned with whether or not the faith is empirically true and more concerned with how it affects the characters in the society they live in. Like, I know the answer, but they don't know the answer, so they're operating under incomplete information.
And I love that because as we're authors, we are able to know the answer. And I think that, like, it creates this fun dynamic where, like, we're God, but then we're also God of the gods. And the characters have no fucking clue. And we can write the characters being like, I'm an atheist. And then you're chuckling to yourself going, like... That's how I feel about whenever you're writing a world where it's like religion affects the characters, but they just don't know. It's so fun to me. I get where you're coming from.
Oh, I have so many thoughts on that, but that's for the next question.
Same. Okay, so for me, I started from the reason that I was religious, or my favorite parts of religion when I was religious. And that comes with the discussion of Terry Pratchett's Small Gods, In small gods, the gods exist and are powerful in correlation with how much people worship them. And so if they have no worshipers, then they don't have any power. And I, as a Christian, found that kind of frustrating because I found the atheist, non-religious understanding of a God who needs human worship to contradict what I had been taught about my religion growing up, which was not that God made us because he needed to be worshipped. It was that he made us because he loved to make things. And he wanted someone to kind of appreciate what he had made alongside him. And the creation of the world came from that in my series as a collaboration of artists and as a love story. So the creation of the world is not from people who wanted things to appreciate them. It's that they all were creative people, all of these gods, who had passions, and they put all of those passions together to make something that worked in the world. So you have the gods of order and chaos, who basically made the other gods for each other as gifts. And each god kind of has their own passion, and that's why that's their domain, is because they love that thing so much that they made it, and they all made it together. And then as far as why only one god gets involved with humanity, and the other gods may or may not exist, and any of them may or may not exist to the public, is that only one god cared about humanity after humanity was made, not to spoil anything. So that involvement is why humans have religion, is because a god was involved with them because that god loved them and wanted them to do well. That god cared about their life and death and wanted to understand them and make sure that they could continue to live and die well. So that's where, once you have the motivation of the god, that informs the motivation of the religion, and then that also informs how that religion is prone to corruption, because especially in Unwanted Prophet, that religion is very corrupt. So I guess it came from my real world experiences, but then started with the creation story. And that creation story, similar to how the Christian creation story of God creating the world and kind of making humans for a reason, informs why Christians practice their religion the way that they do. That's very much how I built the religion in my world.
I can't reread the second book until I finish the first one, but I really want to now.
Yeah, no, the twist in the second book was something that was there from the first time that I wrote the book. Was a completely different setting. It was much more high fantasy with elves and shit. But the plot twist from the second book and the way that the religion functions were exactly the same, because that's the foundation of the whole thing to me.
Define fantasy, elves and shit.
I love that.
Higher fantasy. There was more magic and there were elves and shit.
Elves and shit.
Prophet as it is a low fantasy, which means everything's pretty much normal and historical, apart from there's some gods and some powers and other shit.
I feel like that needs to go on a t-shirt or something. Elves and shit. Like on a t-shirt.
You know what that book reminds me of is the game Black and White. You guys ever play that?
No.
Oh my gosh, that's like you're a god, and you're good or evil depending on your actions, and you're powered by prayer power. So the more you get your people to believe in you, whether through good or bad means, it's more how powerful you are. It was a really badass game. The second one was like, it looked pretty, but I feel like it lacked a lot of the story that was in the first one.
I'll have to check it out, because I do like engaging with stories that use gods that way. I've played in D&D campaigns where that's been a major function of how gods work in the homebrew worlds that I've played in, and like there have been characters whose motivations were to get famous and powerful enough that they could ascend to godhood, much like, Baldur's Gate and whatnot. So I do love engaging with stories like that, even though if when it comes to my own writing, that's not something I resonate with as much. I think that actually does segue really well into our last question, which is that fantasy, elves and shit, magic exists, and oftentimes gods can be observed, like in Baldur's Gate. Like, you can see the gods, they exist, you can talk to them. That's not something that happens in the real world. So how can a story where the gods exist and you can see them, how does that affect how religion is practiced? How do you like to see that tackled? What are your preferences for how different stories have addressed that, or your own stories, or what are some fun things that you've seen people do with that specific issue?
That's such a broad question. So I'll do a shameless self-plug first, because
Please.
Minor spoiler, later in the Threya saga, the gods and goddesses do start to take a physical form and interact with characters, and it does have a really strong effect on the way the plot goes. And I have seen that done in other books where, gods do interfere, and they do, perhaps not in their ethereal, godly bodies but do interact with characters, kind of like they do in sort of Greek myth. They'll appear as a different animal, or take a sort of human mortal form and interact. And I think it's quite interesting how characters can portray that event, because if they're strong believers, they're like, oh, that makes sense that this deity would appear and do what they're going to do. Whereas people that perhaps do not believe, we're going to be like, what the heck is going on? Like, where did this person come from, or what have you? I think that's quite interesting. And I know I'm sounding like an absolute massive fangirl right now, but I also really like the way Noah did it in the Ivyborn books, because the gods do become quite tangible in that story, and their impact is dramatic, shall we say. So yeah, I think when they do get involved and aren't just appearing and like whispering words in people's ears, but getting involved, I think that's a really interesting way of doing it.
Very cool.
My brain is struggling with this question.
How so? What are we struggling with?
So basically you want to know like how to tackle the gods like appearing in the world?
Yeah, to rephrase, like in real life we don't know if religion is real or not. And in fantasy worlds, sometimes the characters do have genuine proof that the god, or like oftentimes that the god they are worshiping exists. And how do you make a religion still feel real, and like how do you still make the way that people worship, engage with religion feel real, and not like they're just in like making a deal with like a, like devils and stuff exist in D&D, different high powered. How do you make a god feel different and a faith feel different from just like a high powered wizard? What's the difference between an extremely powerful wizard and a god with a religion when you know that both of those things exist, I guess.
All right, so the mystery is taken out of it. How does it still feel godly?
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that everyone likes a hero, and we don't want gods to just be these high-powered things. I don't even think it can be so much about the power, it's how they have manipulated history and time. If you can like feel their presence, not even physically, but just like the way it's affected the world, and if you have that much influence to be able to physically affect the world or people's mindsets or perspectives, like that's to me what makes something godly. And like in the Ivorborn world, this is where it's similar to Levena. I don't even know if I touched on this, but like, so there's the main gods, and then they each create smaller gods, and those are like caretakers, and each caretakes a specific aspect of humanity. So there's like fertility, laborers, music, judgment, different aspects of the world. And if one of them is missing, you really can feel that difference, because they're not influencing people to make music or things like that. It's still there, but it's like AI music, it's not inspired, and it's not opening up their heart to that specific aspect of the world. Minor kind of, I guess it is a spoiler for it, but like, so later when the gods do get revealed, or certain people we know get turned quote unquote into gods or revealed as gods, even though you know them personally, they still feel like this otherworldly thing because of what they've done to get there and what they do after. They may not be like any more powerful, but what they choose to do with the power they have is what makes them godly.
Got it. That is a really interesting interpretation, and I really enjoy that. Okay, Sebastian.
So circling back to what you brought up in the previous answer about atheism in a world where gods have a tangible effect on reality, I think a lot of writers and readers struggle with the concept of atheism in worlds where gods are arguably very real. And I think that stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what atheism means in a fantastical world. Because, like, the example is usually, wow, this character doesn't believe in the gods, they must be stupid, the gods are right there. And it's not that a fantastical atheist doesn't believe the gods are real, it's that they refuse to bow to those gods.
Yeah.
The only ethical response to an unjust authority is resistance, and the fantastical atheist is resisting the unjust authority of the gods for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Oof, I love that.
That's really good.
I'm fucking writing that one down.
Yeah. quotes for the ages. But you're so right. I think that is definitely something that I see a lot of people struggle with, especially like, again, playing so many D&D games. This is a fight that I've seen players have with DMs multiple times about, I want my character to be an atheist. and the DM being like, what does that even mean? You know the gods are real, and kind of struggling with what that does mean. But I think that's a really good and very concise way to point out that it's still a thing that can exist. It's just the motivation behind it and the way it manifests is so different, but still can feel very parallel to like some atheists in the real world feel similarly. Not in a God's not dead kind of way.
He just ain't shit. I ain't bowing.
Yeah. Any further elaboration on that excellent point, or?
That is all I've got.
Sebastian literally dropped Mike with that, though. That was like...
Yeah, genuinely.
The quote, drops Mike. Over to you, Nina.
Gotta follow that one up. Luckily, we're going back to Dragon Age with this one. Dragon Age, to me, does something really good, which is the gods and magic and everything, a lot of it is visible. But the crucial thing is that it still needs to be interpreted by mortals, and mortals are wrong. I really enjoy how in Dragon Age, mortals can see things that gods do. And then because the gods are beyond them and don't want to necessarily explain everything to them, the mortal races and religions have to interpret these real actions that these real entities have done and try and communicate this. Flemeth, one of my favorite characters, is a great example of this because she is very involved and she is kind of fucking with things, but you don't know why. And over her course of being involved in the world over history, people have interpreted her so incorrectly that it makes people do things, not necessarily in her name, but like in this world, people do things in the gods' names based on what they think the gods want, and they're just wrong. And that's, again, the foundation for Prophet, is like, Gethin has been very clear about what he wants from his church, but when humanity's motivations clash with that, they interpret him in certain ways. And he knows he doesn't want to interfere too much, so he only touches humanity for the most part through his church, and his influence is confined to the church and to his prophet more directly. And because he feels like kind of this this scientist with his rats in a lab because of his own motivations, he doesn't want to poke them too much one direction or another. He feels their autonomy is very important. So when they misinterpret him, oftentimes all he can do is add another variable to his experiment to try and hope that the decision that he made gets through to them what he actually wants. Like, oh, you guys are doing all of these things where you act like crime makes someone unworthy of their life. Well, here's me, your god, appointing an actual criminal as my prophet. Hopefully that'll get through to you what I think of what you're doing. And it does, but it takes a long time. So I guess my short answer is human interpretation of the tangible effects of a god is where I like to see people take that.
Nice.
Deal with it, humans.
It's your problem now.
Deal with it, humans. That's like what we said earlier. The gods have their own agendas and their own motivations, and humans are just kind of caught in the crossfire a lot of the time. Yeah, but that's anything else y'all want to say about fantasy religions? This has been a pretty in-depth and very long episode, so I don't want to keep us here for too much longer, but if y'all have any closing remarks, go ahead and throw them out there. Otherwise, we will outro.
I just feel very inspired to dig into my atheist vampire a little bit more in book 3. That's all I gotta say. I think Sebastian's perspective has, like, unlocked something.
Yay!
Do it.
Yeah, all y'all's perspectives have been so insightful and so, like, from different angles, things that I had and hadn't considered, different takes on things. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, this one's been a good one.
Yeah.
All right, in that case, I realized I introduced myself with my nickname and not my actual name when we introed. So I have been Carolina Cruz. That's my author name. That's how you can find my books. Oh, and you can find me at Nina Wolverina everywhere. What about y'all?
So I have been Luna Day, and you can find me everywhere under Luna Day.
I'm Noah Hawthorne, and I'm on Instagram, website, all that good stuff at Neshama Publishing.
And I'm Sebastian Nothwell, and you can find everything at sebastiannothwell.com.
As for our podcast itself, we have been the Right Here, Right Queer podcast. You can find us on Instagram at Right Here, Right Queer Pod, I believe. That's RIGHT here, WRITE queer. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. We will see you guys again next time.